Okay, it is now 7:30. We can go ahead and call the meeting to order. Beginning with roll call.
Sure. Committee Member Cooper?
Here.
Committee Member Larson?
Here.
Committee Member Way?
Here.
Chair Smithies?
Here.
And Committee Member Martin and Committee Member Peterson are both enjoying vacations.
Great. So now moving on to the approval of the minutes from, let's see, Wednesday, June 19th was our last meeting. Are there any comments on these?
Yeah. In the 6.2, one of the things that we talked about was adding targets to the cap. I don't see that captured there.
We can add that in.
I didn't have any other comments.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? Okay, I move we approve the June 19th minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Great. And so now we have the opportunity for public comment. So if you would like to address the committee on any item that's not on our agenda tonight, now is your opportunity. Yes.
I know I have 3 minutes, and I'll take less than that.
Thank you.
I have a few comments on the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. My name is Mark Melgen. I've lived in Albany for 33 years, and I worked for PG&E for 34 years, including the last several years in their Assembly Bill 32 implementation group. But again, it's been a while. I retired 6 years ago. I sent comments, written comments on the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan to Ms. Carrad last Friday, and she said that they're going to be in the record, so you'll get a chance to see those. In looking at the plan further, it struck me that there's very little in there about effectiveness.
Excuse me, you will have an opportunity. This is for opportunity to talk on things that are not on the agenda. The Climate Action Plan is on the agenda, and there'll be a separate opportunity for you to address that.
Thank you. If there's anyone who'd like to address something that's not on tonight's agenda, so primarily we'll be discussing the Climate Action Plan. Great. So then moving on to announcements, beginning with sustainability events.
Yeah. So there's a Bike About Town scheduled this Friday and then again on August 16th. Friends of Albany Parks has a cleanup of the Albany Greenway on July 27th and of Peggy Thompson Pierce Street Park on August 17th. All the Albany CERT community meeting is on July 31st. And a new 8-week CERT class starts on Tuesday evenings starting August 27th. So if you're not CERT certified, I highly recommend it. I did it and it's very fun. And then National Night Out is an event to promote community resilience, and that's on August 6th. I encourage you to make sure your block is signed up for that event as well, or find a friend who has a block that's signed up for a block party. So that's what's happening between now and your next meeting.
Great. Just curious, is there anything planned about advertising the Carbon-Free Albany for the National Night Out? Have we discussed that at all?
We haven't discussed that at all. We can think about it. It's sort of it's a difficult event to, it's sort of like I'll be there and I can talk to people about it, but I can't really recruit other people to do the same. So.
Understood. Okay, thank you. And so then the next is the EBCE update.
Yeah, I just have a quick update today. They're continuing to implement their local development business plan. I don't have specific details for you this month. And I've requested updated enrollment numbers, and they're supposed to get me those tomorrow. So I can send those to you if you want. And then an update on the replacement for Committee Member Sear. I've heard some interest from several people, but we have not received any applications yet. So I'll go ahead and send a link to the vacancy to all of you in case you want to share with your networks too.
Per-
Personal reasons. No, she's in Albany. Yeah.
Thank you. And now moving on to presentations. So I believe we have a presentation from Ryan Gardner from Rincon Consulting.
And you can just use the arrows. Oh, yeah, thank you.
Oh. All right, kind of in the middle, that's good. So yeah, my name is Ryan Gardner.
And Ryan, could you speak into the mic because we're recording? Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. My name is Ryan Gardner. I'm a senior project manager with Rincon Consultants, and I've been working on the Climate Action Plan. And I'm here to talk a little bit about our work on the greenhouse gas inventories, the work we've done to kind of standardize the past inventories with the new EBW inventory, kind of making changes to all of those so they're consistent over the years. And then also talk a little bit about the forecast, and we'll get into some of those methodologies, and then I can answer kind of any other questions you might have about that process. So these are the final inventory results, 2005, 2010, 2015, and 2017. Pretty steady decrease in emissions over time, which is pretty cool to see. A lot of that is being driven by changes in emission factors rather than activity data. It's kind of where we're at, but we can dig into that a little bit. This is just a kind of a deep dive into the different sectors. Really jumps out at you is transportation making up half of the emissions. And then another big chunk coming from natural gas. A little bit of waste. You'll notice we do not have water, wastewater off-road. Those have been dropped out of all the inventories to focus on these major sectors. Those would all account for 1% or less. Some more kind of just trend stuff. This has all of the emissions just in table format if you wanted to dig into that at all. Electricity was down 63%, 2005 to 2017, and that's largely driven. So this doesn't have your opt up to EBCE 100% renewable or 100% carbon neutral yet. So that was just from like SB 100 type renewable portfolio standard emission changes over time. Reduction in natural gas usage, reduction in waste, transportation down, again, mostly with emission factors.
Ryan,
Yeah.
can you explain that? Electricity down 63%. What?
I believe that number, I'm looking at it now, I think that might be the number that's included once you opted up. So I think that's referencing 2005 to, no, that doesn't make sense either. 2005 to 2017, but that doesn't look right.
Electricity use is down 63%.
Oh, emissions, sorry.
Electricity emissions down because of
Changes in emission factor predominantly. So,
from the grid.
yeah, grid tied emission factors.
Ryan, well, sorry, hi. Just on the last slide, do you know why the waste has gone up since 2015?
Why waste has gone up from 2015.
Yeah, it seems like it's gone, it was a minimum in 2010. And it's gone up actually quite a bit.
I can speak to that. Waste is correlated with the economy.
I see. Okay. I see.
It's actually, yeah, it's interesting. Makes a good point. We've seen that quite a bit in other cities as well, where there was kind of like a downward trend and then increase.
I see.
A lot of cities have grown over that time. Not a lot of growth in Albany, but that contributes as well.
Right, okay. And then one other question, the passenger transportation has gone down Do you know if that's being driven by the cleaner fuels, like the LCFS, which is roughly, I don't know, of the order of 10%? That seems like it's more like a 15, I don't know, it seems like
It's being driven, yeah, so VMT has gone up.
okay.
So the actual act of driving has not gone down at all. But we have cleaner cars, we have more hybrids, we have more electric vehicles, LCFS, Pavely, all that kind of stuff is being built into the MFAC model. So we can get into the models and kind of, transportation is the trickiest sector because at the end of the day, we're downscaling regional models and regional emissions. We don't know every single vehicle that's being driven in Albany, right? We're taking the emissions model that the state has, which is done by county, and then we're downscaling that to here. So it's kind of a ballpark.
Okay.
But it is, those emissions are going down because of changes to emission factor rather than to the activity data.
So you can't get data from the DMV on registered cars in Albany?
We can now get the number of electric vehicles registered in Albany, which is when we get into talking about how we're going to quantify our reduction targets and our goals, that's going to be a really useful data set for that. There's also, we can get into a little bit more when we get to transportation, but there's a lot of opportunity, hopefully in the next like 5 years or so, to start using like big data sets that Google and others have. There's some pilot projects going on now that are kind of not being publicized, but they're using big data to validate local models. And that's been working out pretty well, but it's just like it's an added level of complexity. You'd have to do like a complete study and use that big data to validate your like local model.
But you can't get the actual number of vehicles and the type?
We can get,
DMV for Albany, can't you see like X number of cars are EV, the rest are gas powered?
yep, we can get the number of EVs, number of hybrids, and the number of just conventional gas. We don't know like the, number of Toyota Corollas versus number of F-150s, but we can say there's this many gas or diesel vehicles, this many EVs, and we'll use that, and we are using that to set some goals and then calculate possible greenhouse gas savings by meeting those goals. And that's a pretty new thing. They just started doing that like this year, I believe. So when we first got the inventories from all these different years and the 2017 EBU data was great because everyone got an inventory pretty much. The downside was they just picked a set of methodologies and did them for everyone, and it turns out that they're different than every single inventory that every single city had. So they were kind of, it took a little bit of work to get all those to coincide, and we're working on like 2 or 3 different, or with 2 or 3 different cities right now to adjust those EBU inventories and make them consistent. And once we started digging into the past inventories, there's some changes in methodology between those years. So we went back and then we also ran into this PG&E data issue where because you're a smaller city, just the handful of industrial clients are failing the 15-15 rule. So that's if there's less than 15 meters for any category or any one of those is more than 15% of the data or 15% of like the total gas or electricity use, then they roll it up into the next group. And if it still fails the 15-15, then they just don't give you the data at all. So you are now in that boat where you can't get your commercial or industrial gas data, and they're combining the electricity. And I think one year it actually failed the electricity too. So I'll get into that. We tried to do some problem solving. We've run into this with a few cities now. So we've had to develop some methodologies to do the best we can. It's definitely an estimate, but I feel like it's pretty solid, at least for the time being. There's a pretty good chance, I've heard some rumblings, that EBCE actually can get natural gas data, and they're interpreting the 1515 rule differently. So we may be able to just get all that data back, but this is kind of the best we can do until that time. We went through and reran all of the VMT data, reran all the models, made sure everything was consistent, used the same methodologies to determine emission factors for all the years. We found some inconsistencies with alternative daily cover in the waste section, so we updated all of those, and then did some work on the bus transportation, which is like a small part, but it was kind of inconsistent through a bunch of the years. So we just feel that it's really difficult to show that you're making progress if you have different methodologies in your past inventories. It is hard because methodologies are changing all the time and there's like new data available. And so we tried to just go back, make everything super consistent, and now we feel really strongly that you can look at the emissions that you have in each of those years and know that those are actual changes, right? Like, you're pretty confident, or we're pretty confident, that what you're looking at reflects reality and actual progress that got made, rather than just, oh, we did it this way this year and we did it this other way this next year and we got a reduction just because of that methodology change, which it happens all the time. We see it in every city we work on. It's really hard to take past consultants' work or new people go back and look at what was done before, and not all the data is there. Maybe there's just emissions, no activity data, and they just kind of carry on the best they can. So we went back and kind of cleaned all that up. Tried to have really consistent sources of data. So make sure we use the same population data for every year, or the same source for population data for every year, so it's consistent over time. Cited all those sources, so you should have a really good base to continue to do this in the future. And we updated all of the global warming potentials to the fifth assessment report. So electricity, like I was saying, industrial data was cut for 2014 through 2017. So we used a ratio of residential to commercial and industrial for the previous years. So up from 2005 through 2013, we have all the data we need. So we looked at what the ratio of the residential usage to the commercial and industrial usage was. And the point of doing that is we were trying to normalize for any changes in temperature or the economy or anything else. So by tying into that residential usage, we're basically assuming as residential goes, commercial and industrial will kind of go along with that in its ratio. So if residential had like a super high year because it was really cold and they needed extra heating or something like that, that'd be more for natural gas, which we did the same way. But it would kind of collect that and track it. There is definitely the chance that residential had like a major change and everyone got super efficient and commercial didn't. In that case, our data would be skewed, but it's kind of the best way that we can come up with that data now, since PG&E won't give it to us.
But businesses aren't running their furnaces at night, but homeowners are.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So how do you account for those kinds of things?
We're essentially, because it's a ratio, it should still work out, right? We're not saying that whatever the difference between residential behaviors and commercial behaviors were, we went back in history and got all that data, that ratio between the two, and we're saying, okay, commercial uses 0.83, I think it was, % of residential. And we just applied that moving forward. So that kind of stuff would be collected. It would really be like if those buildings really changed how efficient they were, which maybe a little bit, but probably not significantly. Anything else on that?
A question for staff and Claire. I thought we did get industrial data through 2015.
I don't believe so.
Okay, all right.
Maybe
and then,
through 2014?
Okay.
For electricity, they rolled up, for some of those years, they rolled up industrial into commercial, but for other years, they did. One year it failed, and then for natural gas, they didn't at all. So we just wanted to make sure that we left industrial in there. Some cities, they had like an opposite problem, and we had to take out industrial. That was like the only option, but with you guys, it was better to leave it in and have that consistency.
Because I thought that what we had was just one sector for commercial, which includes commercial/industrial.
So you actually have two sectors, and in previous years, they reported it that way, but because of the way, when they changed the way they interpreted the 15-15 rule, most years they would take industrial, it would fail on its own, they'd stick it with commercial, and then it would pass, and they'd give it to you as a lump of commercial and industrial.
But we can't get that anymore? We can't ask for that lump?
Nope.
Of
I'm pretty sure in
commercial and
2017, electricity and gas both failed.
Yep.
So we got nothing for commercial or industrial.
And what we're finding is that as the usage is getting lower, so like buildings are getting more efficient, I think it's narrowing down, it's making those big users relatively bigger because they're not changing much, and then they're failing. That seems to be how it's going.
Is there any effort, maybe more globally or statewide, to surmount this? Because it seems at the city level, this is a big gap
It's
in
pretty-
visibility and in holding, commercial businesses or, these are large concerns also accountable. So it just seems like this is a huge problem, and just
We've been
wondering
talking
what-
about it
what
on
can
a
be
county
done.
level for years,
Yeah.
trying to, because it's a CPUC rule, so trying to advocate for change.
Yeah.
It's incredibly frustrating, and it's not just you guys.
Sure.
Sacramento, which you'd think is like a big city, could like throw their weight around it a little bit, and it's the same exact thing.
Yeah.
But like I said, East Bay Community Choice Energy, they may have the ability soon to get natural gas data and electricity data, and they're choosing essentially to interpret the 15-15 rule differently, and we may be able to get more, maybe if it isn't disaggregated, at least that lump that we can look at. So hopefully soon things will be better, but for now, this is kind of what we're stuck with.
And the 15 is, one is 15%, and what's the other 15?
15 individual users. So if there's less than 15. Yeah. So if you have less than 15 industrial clients, so usually if it's only failing on that, once you put it into commercial, you're usually fine because there's plenty of commercial meters.
Okay.
But I'm guessing you have at least one large industrial client that is failing you.
I see.
And now you know that there's someone who's using at least 15% of your natural gas and electricity. Waste methodologies. We went back and added in alternative daily cover. So some percentage of the waste you send to the landfill, they just use it to cover the landfill. And that used to be taken out and be like, oh, it's not waste. We're using it for stuff, but it doesn't really count if you're using it to cover up a landfill. So the new methodology is to not leave that out. And the EBU data came with that, so we went back and added it. We ran the Cal Recycle data, got all that for previous years, so your waste emissions went up a little bit from where they were, but I think much more accurate, and we went through and updated all the emission factors as well with the applicable Cal Recycle waste characterization studies, so whether it's the 2008 or 2014.
What is the alternative daily cover?
It's literally when you it's like some amount of waste. It's really small, like I think it was, the emissions are, like 50 or 100 metric tons a year from alternative daily cover, but it's literally the garbage that they use to cover the trash at the landfill instead of like bringing in like virgin
It's often,
soil or something.
it used to be green waste, and then they banned green waste from the landfill, and then it includes MRF fines, which is basically like whatever comes out of the recycling line that seems like it's probably not actually recyclable ends up on top of the
I
landfill.
think they'll use like construction waste, things like that. But it's just waste that still ends up in the landfill, but it's diverting like soil. So we add it now. Transportation is always a really tough one because there's a ton of models out there, and there's a bunch of different ways that you can estimate it. It's the only one on here that's not directly tied to like a metered amount. Like, we know pretty well how much waste was generated. We know exactly how much electricity and gas was used if we could get all the PG&E data. But transportation for everyone is based on a model. So we use the MTC Travel One model, which is local to this county, and but it only provides the passenger vehicles. It doesn't do heavy duty. So for heavy duty vehicles, we used MFAC, which is standard. It's a state model. They have it modeled for Alameda County, and we could take that, and then we scale everything based on population, essentially, is the methodology we use. And we also use that to develop our emission factors. And let's see, some changes. We took out BART. You don't have a BART station. Doesn't really make sense to include it. Amtrak and off-road we also removed, and that stuff helps. The off-road is even more of a model, like it's less specific than the MFAC model, and you guys don't have a ton of off-road equipment here. So we took that out as well. So now we're really just focused on the data sources that are real and we can tie to. Again, I think in the future, this transportation modeling is going to get much better, but right now, I think you're set up pretty well. It's the best we can do at this time.
So the question, I guess, for staff also is, a while back there was an update from Stop Waste for a recalculation of Albany's greenhouse gas emissions, and there were also similar sets of changes or updates to the methodology. And one of the comments was that Stop Waste wanted to standardize among different cities in the East Bay, like Dublin and Fremont and Piedmont, et cetera. I'm curious now with these changes how these stack up with the previous changes that Stop Waste made, and also how we will be able to compare with other cities in terms of the percent reductions from 05 and 2010, et cetera.
So what Ryan's discussing when he's referring to the EBU inventory is the stop waste inventory. It was funded by East Bay Energy Watch. So that's what Ryan was basing his information on, was that. I can't speak to what other cities are doing in terms of these changes.
Dublin's doing this too, because we're doing theirs. So that's the same at least.
I guess the question is this syncing with what Stop Waste is doing, more or less, or not
This
exactly?
is syncing with the new 2017 EBU. We took their methodology that they did and then used that to make your previous inventories consistent. So we redid the transportation sector from the 2005, 2010, and 2015 inventories. So now everything is comparable.
But I mean, is it the same inventory that same methodology that Stop Waste will be using moving forward?
I hope so. It's what they used in 2017. Future inventories, it's kind of, I think we've seen a lot of methodology changes over time. And I do think that transportation, like if I could fix one thing about climate inventories right now, it would be transportation sector. So my hope is that in the future that will be better and more specific. Again, the changes we're talking about between models are like, a couple percent. So it's not like we're saying, oh, this is like a 20% shift. Maybe it's like 5% max. But again, I think it's just better to have that consistency of models over time. So same as the rest of the EBU for the Bay Area. And hopefully they'll continue to be consistent with that model moving forward. But models change, methodologies change, it's hard to say.
And
So-
Max, to address your question, the stop waste EBU inventory, which was conducted by PlaceWorks, part of that, that their scope of work was to create a sort of spreadsheet database where cities could come in and input that data year to year. And so my understanding is that's what we have moving forward, is to use that methodology that they created that Ryan's using as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. This is just a list, again, of kind of all the stuff we went through. These are our data sources, just so you have them in here. Census data, MFAC and MTC, Travel Model 1, CalRecycle, and PG&E, all super accessible, all updated consistently. And the idea was just to make it as easy as possible for you to do updates in the future. We feel really strongly that the best way to tell if you're making progress is to look at the data from the actual emission sources instead of trying to track estimated emissions reductions from doing different actions. We'd rather do those actions that we think are going to help us and then do our inventories on a regular timescale and see if we're actually being effective, because at the end of the day, this data or this activity data going down is the only thing that really makes a difference. So once we had all our inventories, we then worked on doing our forecast, so we can get into that. The forecast takes all of your data, where we use 2017 as our starting point, and we took population growth from the general plan, and we took Title 24 changes, so we took the new Title 24, looked at how any new growth that you would have would kind of be affected by that, so the impacts would be lower. We looked at your opt-up to 100% carbon neutral. We took the 2.9% opt-out folks. We just took 2.9% of electricity and said, okay, those guys are back on PG&E. And then we modeled PG&E's emission factors over time with SB 100, which is going to zero by 2045. So there's like a really tiny amount of electricity that goes to zero. You can't even see it on the graph, but that's in there. And then MFAC and the MTC Travel One model, those both they're all projected out as well. So we used those, we did model runs for each of the years we looked at, and used that data as far as VMT and adoption of electric vehicles and things like that. And MFAC is nice because it has all the state legislation like LCFS and those things already baked in there. So when you run it for the future, it includes all of those reductions. So this is essentially your adjusted forecast. So that means it includes all of the reductions from state measures. So you get a big bump down in 2025, which is essentially, most of that is coming from your opt-up. So you can see electricity just pretty much goes away, which is the blue and orange bars. So that's where you get that big reduction. That's technically happening in 2018, but you don't get to see it until 2025 because of the years we looked at for the forecast. Then your emissions go down kind of over time to 2040, at which point they kind of bottom out and start to float back up. And that's mostly because a lot of the state programs for VMT reduction and LCFS kind of all peter out about 2040. So any extra population growth you have going on is then you start to get that rise at the end. It's pretty small, but that's why you see a little kind of a dip and then a slight rise. It's those state programs running out. In actuality, the state programs are probably going to continue to drive emissions down, but at this point, we don't ever like to include like any guesstimates about the future. We only include what's like legislated right now. So yeah, that's where you're at. We've got a table in here for our forecast. We just run the numbers out. Again, heavily based on population growth, so that's like the variable that's most important. If you suddenly doubled in size, your emissions would be obviously way different than this. If you lost a ton of population, your emissions would probably go way down, but we kind of have to scale it on something, and you guys are pretty built out, so your emissions kind of stay pretty similar.
On the forecast, when you, back a couple slides, one back from this, the assumptions on state legislation, I have to plead, I don't really know for sure, but are there programs that are in force now to go towards more EV adoption? You say some EV adoption. I
Yeah.
mean, it didn't look like transportation really shrunk very much in your graph. So are there not things that are already in place to drive EV adoption?
There are some, and if you look in the model, the percentage of vehicles that are EVs do go up and start to take a chunk out of VMT. It's generally not enough to drive significant reduction. You're kind of keeping up with growth at that point. That being said, the MFAC model doesn't incorporate the newest projections for electric vehicle adoption. It does not. So there's some in there, but it's not aggressive. It's conservative.
You go to the graph again? This one. That again. So the green is the transportation?
Yep. So again, like you can see, it shrinks down and then it kind of, like about here, it just stays the same. And that's because all the programs that are in MFAC end by 2040-ish, so you start to see reduced benefit.
So the initial reduction from 2017 to 2025 in the green bar for transportation, the reduction in the transportation bar from 2017 to 2025, that is coming from efficiency and LCFS, and I mean, it's a continuation of trend essentially.
So that's assuming everyone pretty much is driving the same amount, but much more efficient vehicles.
Let's see. Okay.
Can you remind me what the yellow bar is?
Yellow is non-residential gas,
Okay.
and gray is residential gas.
It actually grows into the future.
Yeah, it looks like,
But that's,
let's see, let's actually look at the data.
I mean, the takeaway is not enough significant programs to drive reduction to zero, basically. Right?
Yeah, so residential gas and non-residential gas, those look like they're growing pretty much just in line with population growth.
Okay.
We have nothing in there that's assuming that you're going to get some huge reduction because of electrification or something like that.
What is the red bar?
Orange and blue are electricity. So those go away because you guys made a huge move and opted up to 100% carbon neutral. So that drop from 2017 to 2025 is that's your reward for opting up the city.
So the remaining kind of purple is what? I mean, the small purple in out years? That's waste?
Blue, waste.
I see, okay. And so just going back to the table, so this does not include any climate change effects. One effect that was observed is in 2014, 2015, 2016, and maybe a little bit in 2017, but I'm not sure, is that there was a big shift in the climate, and there was a big record, well, as you know, record record hot years.
5 hottest years of the last ever, yeah.
And you can see it here in a sense in that the gas is stepping down from 05 to 2017 in both the residential and the non-residential sectors. I'm not sure why it's a bigger effect in the non-residential, but definitely it's a bigger effect in 2014 and 2015. So I'm just wondering, but I'm assuming that there's no climate impact. This is like a baseline climate, which there is no baseline climate anymore. So is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting, I think it's an important thought. I think doing that accurately and trying to make projections on it is like incredibly difficult.
Yeah, well, it's just to say that one can think about a climate shift case or like a 20, just if we were to look at the trend of the last 5 years, say, and extrapolate that, that's certainly possible. And what it would suggest is that the baseline projection for residential and non-residential gas would be much lower. I mean, it was literally like a 20% shift in the residential gas, well, almost a 20% shift in the residential gas sector, which is huge because if you're doing massive retrofits, you're going to get about that order of energy, of gas savings. So it is something to just keep in mind, but I agree with you, it's not trivial to model, but to first order, those are the scale of impacts which are possible, which we've observed.
Yeah.
It could be bigger, even bigger in the future, we just don't know.
Yeah, no, and there's a lot of, Claire pointed out economy. Like we saw huge dips in emissions some years because of economic depression, essentially. So there's a lot of factors that are pushing these things up and down. This is just our very kind of conservative way that we can look at this and kind of get an idea of what the city needs to do to meet their goals. But yeah, definitely incorrect in lots of ways. I'm guessing this isn't how things are actually going to look, but it's a close approximation, I think.
So I had one other, request. You mentioned as you were describing the slides that there are, energy demand impacts like the kilowatt hours or the therms of demand and also the VMT driven on the one hand, but on the other hand, there are emission factors reductions from the RPS in the state and the PG&E territory, and then also with fuel emission factors for things like the LCFS statewide. Would it be possible to split that out to share with the committee the disaggregation, because I think that would be super useful.
To have activity data, emission factor, emissions.
And understanding
of course.
the relative contribution to local efforts, which could be small or muted compared to the large effects from the emission factors from state policies. I think it would provide the opportunity to answer questions like what's the potential for greater reductions in demand on the local level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. So I have all that. I actually brought a thumb drive with data that we can share. Alternatively, the next step for us is to put together a full appendix, a technical appendix that'll have all of our methodologies, so everything is really clear and you can take that and move forward. And there are some issues with sharing with the community the PG&E data. We actually have to sign non-disclosure agreements to get the data we have and like tell them we're going to destroy it at some time, which it all just seems like very over the top.
Even for the aggregated data that they've shared, which does not violate the 1515 rule, even for just the aggregated data.
Well, we've had to sign NDAs too, but then recently we got data for your intern somehow they just sent it to you.
It's like very unclear about what you're supposed to be doing. I tend to be kind of lax about it. I've actually got yelled at by someone at Rincon that I shouldn't be so lax, but there's some data that you can get by like clicking a button and going on. Zip code data you can get just fine. But if you draw a boundary around a city, then you can't get that data anymore unless you do like a whole process and sign a bunch of stuff and tell them you're going to destroy it after 2 months and not publish it. But we'll provide it to you guys. We just probably can't put it in the cap.
So back to the forecast graph. I don't know. I'm just dwelling on this. Is this consistent with like the state projections? And given that the state has the same goals of carbon neutrality by 2045, 50, do they have a projection that has built in some other things that are like future looking, or is this consistent with what the state would show?
It's consistent with the state.
Okay, so I mean it's really off the rails as far as getting to the goal, right?
So I wouldn't say
I'm trying
that.
to get, if I'm interpreting this right.
Yeah, so the thing with the carbon neutrality target, right? So EO E5518 is the executive order for carbon neutrality. That has not been codified yet. So the next step, what's happened for every other executive order, is that at some point the state says, okay, they codify it, it becomes an SB 30, it'll be like the next version of AB 32 and SB 32. And once that happens, the Air Resources Board will take that up and they'll develop a scoping plan. And the scoping plan will include all of the things that they're gonna do to get to carbon neutrality. So right now, the most recent scoping plan is the SB 32 scoping plan, and that gets us to a 40% reduction below 1990 by 2030. And there's a plan for that. There's measures, a lot of it comes from cap and trade program. So industrial clients, big refineries, things like that, they're gonna be kind of doing the bulk of the reductions. But then there's a bunch of, there's all the money from that cap and trade program then gets plowed back into different programs throughout the state, and they'll be reducing emissions through transportation, EVs, and all that kind of stuff as well.
Okay. I was just thinking in terms of like if I show this to some local community group and say, look, we need to put more pressure on because this is not getting us where we want to be.
Yeah,
Is that the right?
Yeah, that's the takeaway. Like you have a lot. If you're setting carbon neutrality by 2045 or 2050, all of that's got to go away, right? And it's really obvious, like, we need to work on gas, right? Natural gas. Electrification is super important, and electrification will help with all of those sectors except for waste. And waste is going to get helped. One thing that is codified that we didn't include in here is 1383, which is the organics diversion rule. That's going to do a lot for waste. It's going to be pretty difficult, and there's not like a real clear path on how every city is going to do that, so we didn't model it.
Yeah, and also for us, I'm not sure actually how much it's going to affect us because we've done a lot of the things that are in there already.
Yeah.
So
That's great.
If we just had a little blue bar at 2050 left, that'd be great.
Well, you can sequester that, right? So that's the idea is like you got to drop all those down, and then we have to invent some crazy carbon sequestration technology that we haven't yet. So if you guys have free time.
I mean, it's worth pointing out there that the natural gas, the first two bars are become greater than the transportation bar in the next time step, which is 2025, well, which is now basically, I mean, in that time frame, so, which is pretty remarkable. Yeah. So you did mention the possibility of sharing the data. In the past, we have been able to get some of the data from the city and also from Stop Waste about a year and a half ago.
Mm-hmm.
So if you would be able to share the results of the analysis or the data, that would be fantastic for us to, pour over. I mean.
For sure. Yeah, we have it. It's pretty organized right now. There's some cleanup I'd like to do just to make it super clear. Excel spreadsheets have a nasty habit of becoming slightly convoluted when you're like linking all the cells together. But yeah, we'll get that over to you as soon as we can.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good?
Great, thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, you're welcome to come up.
Thank you for considering a new inventory. Thank you for putting it together. I'm wondering if this inventory discounts Western Forge and Flange or not, which this body voted years ago should not be included in the baseline inventory because Western Forge and Flange moved out of Albany, taking its thousands of tons of pollution with it to Texas, and that's not something that this body voted Albany should be taking credit for.
So we did not make any changes to the inventory. We took the data as it was. So that case, that company moved, that activity moved, that's reflected in the data. So you'll see a drop there. There's quite a few issues with trying to figure out how much, like, things move around within the state all the time, and there's no precedent of trying to like go back in time and figure out how much emissions were coming from a plant like that. That data is not really available. It's something that's pretty well guarded. And what causes all these 1515 rules and privacy rules like that is to protect those large users in essence. So I understand the concern that this doesn't represent an actual, something that Albany did to reduce that. But there's also a lot of things that Albany didn't do to like increase emissions with growth and other things. It's just kind of everybody models data this way, and that change is not something that's been done on any inventories that I've seen. It's just kind of the way it goes.
That may be the case. However, this body did pass a motion saying that that should be removed. That is the position. There was an estimate made. And in terms of data, I contacted the company in Texas years ago, and they did provide me their purchasing cost for the natural gas they used when they moved out. And you could see you could see the signal pretty clearly. The emissions from the commercial natural gas consumption were pretty stable before that, and then they dropped from 2005 to 2007, which is exactly when they moved out, and they were fairly stable after that. So I can't recall if this body included the estimate that it wanted to remove from the baseline as a part of that, but I know there was a motion made that was passed to remove that from the baseline.
So I can comment on that just to just refresh everyone. So there was a motion in the Sustainability Committee in 2015 to remove, to not credit the city from the departure of Western Forge and Flange, which was approximately 3,000 tons, as I recall, maybe a little bit more. And so we meaning the Sustainability Committee, primarily Charlie Blanchard and myself, with Preston's help initially several years ago, had been tracking emissions, and we did remove it from the inventory. So it was taken out of the baseline, and so it just kind of the credit was no longer there. So that was our practice, and that was based on our recommendation, which we did approve in the committee in 2015, I believe. So that is the history. I have had several discussions with staff and with Claire, and staff is pretty set on not include or not observing that resolution. So that's the history, and we've had quite a few discussions on that, and it is a point of frustration. But I mean that's the status of it.
I think I see obviously both sides. What's cool about our current target of carbon neutrality is it doesn't matter, right? When we're talking about percent reductions from baseline, so if we're looking at AB 32, 15% reduction from 1990 by 2020, then where you start is important. But now that we're shooting for carbon neutrality, 0 is 0. There's no percent reduction from baseline, so that essentially will come out in the wash. It wouldn't change anything, right? Like where we are today is where we are today, and we have to go to 0 from there by 2045 or 2050. That is not like relevant anymore. So it would essentially make your reduction look less to today, which is definitely true. So it would look like you've done less than you currently do, which wouldn't affect the final reduction in the work moving forward. So if that's any help.
So this gets into, I guess it's the next agenda topic, the draft cap or cap. Because it says specifically, it sort of pats ourselves on the back for having reduced pollution by 27%. And I don't know if that is taking into account the resolution of removing that 3,000 tons from the baseline or not. So I think it is germane in terms of the community understanding what it has actually accomplished along with the state's efforts. And there is a 60% pollution reduction target by 2035. So zero is a long ways out, and we have some milestones between now and then. And I think it's important to be honest to the extent that we can. I would note that on this, 3,000 tons is the difference between 2005 and 2017 for commercial gas, which goes to the point that outside of Western Forge and Phalange leaving, it's been an incredibly stable sector so far.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who would like to comment on this presentation? All right. Thank you very much. And now moving on to Section 6, discussion and possible action with 6.1, discussion of draft climate action and adaptation plan.
So I'm just going to give you kind of a reminder and overview of where we are in our timeline, and then we can talk about any comments you have on the red line changes staff made or any other additional comments you have for the draft cap. So in June, we released the draft for public comment. Lizzie went to all relevant committees and commissions. She's been spending a lot of time at evening meetings the past month. She's in Sacramento for her Civic Spark graduation at the moment, which is why she's not here. But and so she's finished up that, and the public comment period ends this Friday. I encourage everyone up at the dais as well as in the audience to provide written comments to us by the 19th. That includes all of you. If you Max, I got written comments from Max today. Really helpful to have those in writing. In August, well, actually now and through the next month, we're working with our consultants to develop the draft implementation plan and key performance indicators, metrics for how we'll be measuring CAP progress. And we're also going to starting next Monday, reviewing public comments to incorporate into the climate action plan, the next draft that will go to a council study session on September 16th. And then you'll have a chance to review that plan as well as our draft implementation plan at your meeting on September 18th. And then the hope is in October we'll bring a final plan and implementation plan both for you and for council approval in mid-October. So that's our plan for the process. Any questions about this?
Will we get the the public comment input that you and the consultant are reviewing?
We can provide. Yeah, we can share public comment with you at your next meeting if you'd like. Yeah, I think the plan would be we'll incorporate public comment into the draft for council, and we'll attach any correspondence we received.
Can we get the correspondence that's coming in like this Friday? Can we get copies of all the comments that come in?
I think we'll attach it to the. Are you asking for it separately?
Yeah, so prior to the meeting.
Yeah.
Because it sounded like what you're saying is that we would get it at the September meeting, since we're not meeting in August.
Right. I was thinking it would be available as part of the agenda packet for council study session, which would be posted several weeks or probably 2 weeks before your meeting in September.
Right, but my point is that the deadline for public comment is this Friday.
Mm-hmm.
You'll have those in. If we could get those and look at them over the next month prior to that.
I don't have a problem with that.
Why would we?
Yeah, that'd be
right?
great.
Sure.
I think it'd be good for us to
Okay.
read all those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And the input that we gave at the last meeting, do we need to, I didn't know, are we personally supposed to reinforce that with written input to you in order for it to take effect? The stuff we gave at the last meeting is input, right?
Yes, of course.
All right.
Yes. Did you get that?
Yeah,
I
I
emailed it
did.
to you. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that counts as input, and that's
Okay.
part of our public comment record.
All right,
Yes. But I was just saying,
Yeah,
if there
anything
are
other
specific
than-
changes to the to the plan, anything that you want to provide in writing is always easier for us to incorporate anything specific. From your last meeting, a lot of it was more thematic, and so we didn't always put those things, we didn't necessarily address those directly in our red line changes for this. There's something that's going to be part of the discussion with all the public comment.
And I guess that was my other question is, the red line that came back was pretty light in terms of the changes. Are we going to get another red line in between now and September?
So we can bring you, I think the plan for September is to attach, it'll be pretty messy with red line changes, particularly because you've asked for us to change around the order of certain things, and so I think it might be really difficult to read, but our plan was to provide you maybe, one version that's easy to read and then a red line change document as well in September. Yeah, and probably the same for the final.
And that would be with the agenda, the 2 weeks before the meeting in September is what you're talking
Well, you'll get the same thing that council gets, and since council's agendas are posted maybe a week, I think it'll be a week before your meeting that it's posted, actually, with the red line changes. Is that okay?
I'm trying to figure out how much time we have before
To
our meeting.
review.
To review, yeah.
Less than a week, a little less.
Well, council agendas go out Wednesday afternoon, and I think if I have the calendar right, that'll be a week before your meeting.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Exactly a week.
yeah. So is that driven by the preparation or just that it has to be when it gets distributed to council?
That's when agenda packets go public.
So,
But we'll need that time before then.
okay.
I highly doubt we'll have it ready early, given the amount of comment we've received. Yeah.
Following up on that, I'm just looking at the consultant memo from Andrea Martin, and some of the strategies or some of the items seem very pertinent to the CAP. For example, number 9, review strategies for emissions and adaptation impact. June, July, which is really now. And given that we are not meeting in August, that potentially could have been something that we did review in August. And a week out seems very tight. Is there any way that we could get some of these items distributed in the August timeframe? In other words, to give the committee more time, since this is an important milestone, is one question. The other question to the committee is, do we want to wait until September? Do we want to try to meet in August, even if it's 4 of us, or because
I don't think we can do that, can we?
not meet in August? We have no option of meeting in August?
It's a rock-solid rule. Claire and I don't have the authority to schedule a meeting in August, and I can assure you the city manager would not allow us to do that.
Could a subcommittee meet in August?
Subcommittee could meet.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you had a CAP subcommittee. One of your members is no longer part of the committee. You're welcome to, establish a new subcommittee if you'd like.
Unfortunate that we have 4 of us here today.
But what would we have to review?
The implementation plan, because the first time we'll be seeing it is in September, if I'm correct, and then we'll be approving it.
I can't guarantee anything. I haven't seen it. So I can't guarantee that we'll have something ready for you or when we'll have it ready. But next time we have a call with Andrea from Cascadia, which I believe is next week, we can talk through the timeline and see if that's reasonable. My guess is that we're going to be working up until that September deadline for council. We've sort of mapped out the whole process based on that. And so I'm not sure how much we can share with you, but I'm open to sharing. And one thing you're asking for is a little bit different, Max. I think you're suggesting you want information on the review of strategies for emissions and adaptation impact, which maybe will be available. I'll have to check.
In general, it would be a request from the memo of anything which is like now or in August, like maybe it's number 10, that might be tighter, but it seems like it could be number 9 and number 8. Number 8 is the strategy funding analysis, which would be super relevant as well. So to the extent that they could be made available, it'd just be super helpful, even for a subcommittee. I think for the CAP subcommittee, it was, I forgot who was on the committee. Maybe was it you, Eric, and myself and Stephanie? Or was it, is that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
that was it.
Okay.
One idea that what we could do for you is during the course of August, as work products become available, we can send you an email. We'll post the email on the city's webpage so it's available to the public, saying, hey, here's what we have, and post it on the webpage. We wouldn't do a big outreach thing, but it would be for those people who are super interested in it. It would be relatively easy to find, and you would certainly be aware of it when we have it.
That's great. That was my next, like, can we just get them by email at least? Yeah, so that's great. Okay. So what do we think about a week to review the whole plan before it?
I don't think there's an alternative, is what it sounds like.
I guess the alternative would be delay by a month or whatever period of time, the schedule, right?
It doesn't sound like that's an option.
Where do you?
I mean, we can't get
Yeah,
it earlier, and we've got a week to review, so I'm just thinking of options here.
Yeah. What it's sounding like is we're stuck in this position, pretty much, and then
I mean, I think, as Jeff said, if there's things we can provide you early, we will, but.
I think what we should do is reconstitute the CAP subcommittee and, meet as soon as we get something from the city in August, depending on, when that comes through, and meet and review it and do as much as we can ahead of the September meeting.
Tom, would you like to join the subcommittee? It seems unfair of me to join, given that I'm leaving in September, but is that okay to change now? Yeah. Okay, so then that will be Tom, Max, and Eric.
Yeah. I'm sorry if I'm being redundant, but in September, we're going to be asked to ratify the plan, right?
No.
No, okay.
No, is that where the worry is coming from?
Yeah.
No, it's not your final chance to see the plan.
Full CAP review and adoption, that's what I was reading, so I just was.
Oh, I apologize. The memo is incorrect. Look at my PowerPoint. So in September, you will review comments that council has provided at the study session, and look at the next version of the CAP and the implementation plan for feedback, which we'll bring to you and council for a final in October.
Okay.
Just clarifying with the July 19th deadline, are we still able to provide feedback from the committee beyond that point, of course, right?
So the plan is available for public review until it's adopted by council, but the July 19th date is important because we're going to start looking at, we have a massive amount of comments we're going to start incorporating, and so it's going to be much more difficult to do that after July 19th.
Understood.
September 8th is the final draft. And then our meeting is the final draft CAP review.
Please don't. Okay, just look at the PowerPoint, please.
The important thing that's going to happen in September is the city council study session.
Okay.
And that's what we're anxious to get to.
Yes.
Because they could take this in a different direction that you haven't thought of, or any of us have thought of,
Okay.
and we want to find out if that's going to happen or not.
Okay, okay, thanks. And yeah, having that month, September to October, makes me feel a lot better. So.
But still, whatever we can provide to you for you to do review ahead of time, we will.
Yeah, and a subcommittee meeting in August, like latter part of August, sounds like it'd be a good thing.
And even if it's beneficial for you to look at the draft as it is now, and dive a little deeper as a subcommittee into some of those actions, that might be useful for you as well.
Great.
So depends on how you want to discuss the changes that we have made. I can pull up your list of comments on here. I can pull up the list of, I can pull up the red line changes themselves, whatever is most useful to you.
The document that you sent us does not have these changes.
It has some of these changes.
Can we perhaps begin with public comment?
Sure.
Yeah, and now offering an opportunity for public comment on the climate action plan.
Thank you. My first comment was actually regarding the schedule. So your October meeting is after the city council's last October meeting, I believe. So it doesn't seem like the council would be able to take your recommendation. They would have already finalized it by then. So it's the intent that council actually takes it up in November.
I believe it goes to the committee on a Wednesday, and then it goes to council the next Monday.
So this body meets it's the third Wednesday, right? So October, the third Wednesday is the 16th. I see, okay. And so,
And then 21st, I think.
right, okay. Okay, thank you. My apologies. So some thoughts here, and I'll certainly submit these in writing. I recommend that instead of saying greenhouse emissions, that it be referred to as greenhouse pollution, as per the Supreme Court decision that it is a pollutant. These are pollutants that the EPA can and should regulate. And I think pollution carries a connotation to it that is more impactful in terms of the rhetoric to the audience that would be reading the document as to why we want to stop this. The strategies, the 4 strategies, I mean, I think it's great having those sort of high line, single line description of the 4 strategies. The language is kind of different between them. The first one's electrify buildings, I believe, which says what it is, so it's very easy to understand. Well, the next 3 are kind of more abstract and opaque in terms of what they actually mean. So I'm suggesting making them equivalent to the description of the first strategy. So the second strategy could become activate, share, and electrify our transportation instead of saying carbon-free transportation, because a lot of people might not know what carbon-free transportation is. The third one could be reduce, reuse, recycle, and that goes to carbon-free economy. And the fourth one, I'm still struggling on that, so maybe I'll provide something on by Friday. Moving on, on Western Forge and Flange, just to come back to that, because there is this 27% reduction figure that's in the cap. So Western Forge and Flange was about 4% of Albany's pollution. I doubt that in many other jurisdictions in which the policy's been taken up that it's not going to account for leakage, that there was a single entity that was responsible for 4% of the pollution of the entire jurisdiction. So a policy that makes sense for larger jurisdictions may not make sense for Albany. And there was a decision made by this body that entities that emitted at a level that I believe fell within the Bay Area Air Quality Management District's inventory threshold would be taken account of for leakage. And that was sort of set up as the bright line and the rationale for doing that. Action 2.1.2a, it's great to see that added. I would suggest that instead develop a motorist-separated cycling network throughout the city, and that the action also recognize that network would serve micro-mobility devices, such as electric scooters. I suggest that there be an action in support of bus rapid transit on San Pablo Avenue, which Alameda CTC is currently developing plans for. I suggest there be an action in support of levying a tax on gasoline. So right now, the city of Albany doesn't have the authority to do that, even if it should decide it was a wise idea to do. Counties do have the authority under state law to do that. MTC ahead of the last election, well, ahead of every election, it polls on the idea of a regional gasoline tax. And up until the last election, it always polled terribly, so they never thought to put it on the ballot. It actually came up a positive before the last election, so they were thinking of putting it on the ballot. There's reasons they didn't do that, but I think Albany should have a position that any jurisdiction that's going to take that step, it's going to act in support of that. I suggest there be an action to support the effort to adopt a mandatory seismic retrofit ordinance for multi-residence buildings, and this would be under the carbon-free economy. The biggest burst of greenhouse pollution that could ever come from Albany would be if we throw away a bunch of buildings, either burn them up or just throw them in the trash because they get destroyed in an earthquake. So that's something Albany actually has some much more direct control over in terms of carbon-free economy than most other aspects of the economy in the city. The portion of the plan or the action that regards increasing tree cover should mention at least the possibility of greater utilization of city properties. So the city actually owns a considerable amount of property that is outside of sidewalks, and that could be used in various ways to create an increased tree canopy, a significant tree canopy. And then finally, I suggest there be actions to support the installation of cool roofs and cool pavement, the latter being obviously under the city's control and the former being something that it could work to provide motivation for. Thanks very much.
I just
Thank
had
you.
a question, just a clarification question. Can I ask a question?
Are you going to submit written comments too?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Just want to make
No
sure I
worries.
got
Yep,
everything.
absolutely. So I said that at the beginning. I've watched people scribbling. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for your comments. When you mentioned the mandatory earthquake retrofits, were you highlighting the carbon emissions on reconstruction or the carbon emissions on like all the broken pipelines and the emissions of the natural gas emissions during the earthquake, or both? I mean, I wasn't sure exactly what you were referring to.
Yeah, no, it's good. I hadn't thought of the pipelines. I was thinking specifically of something less than a bit less than 1 in 8 residents is projected to burn up in a Hayward Fault 7.0 earthquake, and a bit more than 1/8 is projected to be uninhabitable afterwards. So in part, it's due to the combustion, and in other part, it's the buildings that get thrown away, and so you have to rebuild them with all the embedded emissions that are involved in that. And I don't know, when you rebuild a wood frame building, I don't know if it's a net positive or negative. I mean, obviously, it's sequestering carbon in the wood, but you're also usually rebuilding a concrete foundation. The foundations aren't usually reusable after an event like that. So I don't know what the net is on that, but for the buildings that burn up, and as a side benefit, and I think a lot of these actions have interconnections that could be recognized as benefits. And I'll comment, what happened in Paradise, their water system is unusable now because of the contamination that resulted from the fire. I haven't ever heard that from a fire following an earthquake, but I don't see why that couldn't potentially happen if it happened in Paradise. So that's another side benefit that's obviously outside of the scope of this document, but thanks.
Thank you.
Sorry that I jumped the gun earlier. Again, I'm Mark Melgen, and I work for PG&E. I'm getting the sense from this discussion that there's a whole lot that's gone on that is behind the scenes, not in the cap. So forgive me if my comments are going over familiar ground. As I said, I submitted written comments. I was in the electricity business, and one of the things that I'm interested in is the notion of putting solar on a lot of homes, rooftop solar. The California grid operator is already at some times of the year curtailing utility scale solar and setting the wholesale price negative so that we can pay Arizona to take our solar and they will curtail theirs. So if it's rooftop solar plus storage, that's wonderful. But if it's just rooftop solar, I'm wondering how much bang we're getting for that. And I'm also wondering about how much it costs. I don't see any reference in the draft cap whatsoever to cost effectiveness. I put some in my comments. And it also would be worth asking PG&E. When I worked at PG&E, I saw the costs to add on to some distribution circuits if they became occasionally net sources of electricity to the grid. You know, if it's just a few houses per block, it's always still a net sink. The power is all still going the way the circuit was designed. But for some circuits, if you add enough rooftop solar, then this distribution circuit becomes a source of electricity to the grid. And I'm not an electrical engineer. I don't understand why the differences are extreme as they are, but I can recall on some of them it was just piddling cents, and on some of them it was really eye-watering sums. So it'd be worth at least trying to get PG&E involved to see what would be involved if a really significant fraction of the homes in Albany went to rooftop solar. Anyway, so that, I've already submitted my written comments. Oh, my last is sort of a schedule comment. Is there going to be an opportunity for the public to submit comments to the city council before the study session? And
Always.
And will we have time to see what the council is looking at and then submit comments, and it's more than just a few days?
It's, what, 5 days, 6 days?
The Wednesday before a Monday evening meeting, so it's 5 days is the standard, is when it gets released. We have to, as staff people, we have to get it finished a week before that. We're almost a week before that. But you'll have, most people, it's essentially a Wednesday afternoon through the weekend to the Monday evening, the following Monday evening, that information will be available.
Which is as much time as council has to review as well.
And then the comments that I would submit, for example, would show up on the council members' laps the day of the meeting.
If you submit comments 24 hours before the meeting, then yes.
Okay.
If you get the comments to us a week or so before the meeting, we can add it to the city council's packet as they get it. So the earlier you get comments to us, the better.
Yeah, although I'd like to make comments on what they're going to be, so that there's an issue there anyway. By the way, it's clear to me that there's been a tremendous amount of work here, so thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Susan Clifford, and I really appreciate the detail that has come forward. And we were told when we were to review the plan that this was a working draft and it was not fully designed or formatted, and that we were not to focus on that type of a review, but the content. But I do need to share something with you. I thought that the plan, one of the excellent things about it was that it's measurable. However, typically in a plan, what's measurable is the mission statement, not the vision statement. So and it may be that your consultants have a really good reason for saying our vision is, and not the concreteness of a mission. But the plan does have all the measures. It has all the measures that we're going to follow up on, which again typically is the mission statement. So maybe they want to say vision mission statement, but typically the vision is, it's this first part. Albany works together to ensure a vibrant and sustainable urban village that is livable. That's probably the vision statement. And then the other parts are here because you have them on page 8, the specificity, livable, equitable, resilient, and engaged. And those are the parts that you're going to measure, and you have the measures for that. And again, I apologize if this was not appropriate, but I didn't turn it in with my comments because we were instructed not to look at that part of it. But thank you for letting me do it tonight.
Thank you. And Susan, if you want to provide us a copy of comments for formatting stuff, we're happy to take that too. We just wanted people to focus the conversation on the content, which you have done. So thank you.
I did, and I did turn in those things, and I don't want to be in someone else's work if formatting is someone else's work. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. So then I guess we can move on to committee comments.
I didn't really have anything. I mean, the red line looked like it was just little, typos almost.
Yeah.
So I didn't have any new thoughts on.
Yeah, and to clarify, some of the red line changes that aren't referred to here were Nick Peterson had sent us a draft that was fully marked up, and so those other changes are probably from him directly as a committee member.
Yeah, could you clarify, Claire, what the goal of our comments are? Is it just to continue to provide feedback?
Yeah, just to give you an opportunity to provide additional feedback before we go into our next draft. And if you have rebuttals to these comments too, if there's things you want us to further analyze.
My biggest issue with the draft, which I commented on last time, was that some of the there aren't targets that are measurable, how you get from point A to point B, and what the interim targets are to get there. I mean, there are some statements that that I think need to include some targets that we can measure progress against, specific kinds of things. I know it says that it's going to be addressed on the next draft of the implementation plan, but I'd like to know what they're thinking of before we see the final version, if it's totally out of line with what our comments were around specific targets. Do you have any?
I can't speak to specifics yet, except that you'll be able to review it in the next draft before you see the final draft, so there'll be time for you to comment.
So one comment is the goals on page 7. So that was following from the general plan and our earlier recommendations, so 60% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, but restating as pollutions by 2035 and carbon neutral by 2050. But I think we should revise those to be more aggressive, since the state has already set an executive target of carbon neutrality by 2045. And Albany should be in front, so we should pull that in.
We talked about that last meeting, right? Did
We
make-
did, but
Thought we did some motion or something.
I don't.
did we do a motion?
No,
or,
we did not.
Okay.
If I may on that one, our thought was that that's a kind of a high-level direction that the city council should probably weigh in on. And we would provide them your recommendation to make that change.
Okay.
We should make a
Yeah, sure.
recommendation to them, right? To city council.
Right.
Would it be better if we made a formal motion recommending to council? Or would that be?
If you'd like, I don't know if you need to. I think we would intend to communicate that to them one way or the other, but if you feel like that strengthens your presentation to them, that's great.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about the reasoning last time was we should be in line with the state at least, and yeah, I think we were all in
Do we
I
want
was
to
in agreement with that.
decide a specific timeline or date? Is it 2045, 2040? Is it earlier
Well,
than that?
I was just Just going back to Albany has been trying to be a climate action leader, and based on precedent, has been trying to be ahead of the state or more aggressive than the state. It is a smaller, more walkable community than a lot of communities within the state. It has very, high walk score, and it probably has a higher adoption rate for electric vehicles and solar PV, probably. So I would recommend, not just keeping abreast of the state, but being more aggressive than the state. If we are resetting a goal of carbon neutrality instead of 2050 and more aggressive than the state at 2045, so that would be 2040 or earlier, then the 2035 target should really be like 90%. And that's obviously very high and very daunting, but I mean, that's what it would take. That might not be sufficient, given that the IPCC's recent report was saying, we really need to get, well, depending on what you're reading, and the percentages or the probabilities of not exceeding 1.5 C, we may only have 12 years to get to carbon neutrality. So it's just to say that I think we should be aggressive, and if we miss, we miss. But I mean, now's the time to set our sights much more aggressively.
I agree.
But I'm open to discussion. I mean,
I forget.
What do you guys think?
I'm trying to remember how we got to what we have right here, the 60% in 2035 and neutrality in 2050. I think we.
So I think, yeah, I mean, I think it was maybe a few months or maybe a year or two before you joined the committee, but I think the original goal, well, the state's executive order was 80% carbon reduction by 2050, so we wanted to go beyond that. And the 60% reduction was prior to SB 32, so at the time, that was being more aggressive than SB 32, but now it's, it's whether it's more aggressive or not, it's, it's not that much more aggressive than SB 32, which is 40% reduction in 2030. So that's some of the background. Yeah.
And I agree with it, at least with the state, if not more aggressive. And I agree. Yeah, we have all the reasons to be more aggressive. I just was sorry. I was just mulling like, okay, so what does this do to our consultants' plan? And so, but yeah, I would like to see Albany be more aggressive than the state. And I think we should make a recommendation to the city council that we should at least be at the state level. So, like you say, Max, this used to be more aggressive. Now it's less aggressive. So we should keep pace with that.
We did discuss 2040 was the number I think we kind of settled on at our last meeting. My one concern is, do we feel confident that these strategies will bring us to 90% by 2035? That's what I felt similarly. So, yeah.
I don't think that this plan needs to get you to 2035. I don't think that's really the intent. I think it's getting to carbon neutrality is going to be a huge, huge shift of everything, right? The economy, like you can only control the vehicles, you can't even control what's in your city, and you definitely can't control half of your transportation that's coming from other cities, right? So the state has to go together. But I don't think that in this plan, we're going to be able to come up with, do all these things and you're going to get to carbon neutrality. It's more, these are the things you have to do now if you want to get to carbon neutrality ever, right? Like these are the first steps, kind of like a 5-year plan, right? These are the big things we start doing now and we make progress over time. Whatever that goal ends up being, you have to kind of set the base, and that's what we're focused on.
Thank you.
So don't worry about hitting.
Do you want to keep discussing, or do you want to make a resolution or some sort of thing for the committee? I mean, for the city council. Yeah, I mean, because
So then
Max, you said
90%.
it really well. That
Yeah.
that this used to be more aggressive, and now the state's fortunately moved to a higher goal, so we should keep pace with that and being our aggressive little selves.
So then 2035, 90%, 2040, net zero.
I can make a resolution. Is the committee comfortable? Okay. So I resolve that we revise the goals of the CAP 2.0 from the current goals to restate them to be, for Albany to be carbon neutral by 2040 and a 90% reduction in greenhouse gas pollution by 2035.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nice.
Great.
An additional measure I'd like to add under 3.2. 3.21 talks about, it's something that's going to get, sounds like it's going to get implemented before the CAP does. This reusable for, no, this is adoption is planned for 2020, following completion of the draft ordinance. So that's something that's about to happen anyway. What I'd like to see is a measure in here about plastics in general. Plastics have if they're petroleum-based, a lot of pollution associated with them. A goal to eliminate single-use plastics in commercial use in Albany. So that would include things like buying things at Safeway where they have those plastic bags or fruit is in plastic containers.
Right.
That's a huge waste item. It's a huge pollutant. So I think Albany we should drop some goals around that, eliminating single-use plastics from commercial operations within the city.
Yeah, I think actually that fits in here quite nicely. That's the conversation we're having. We had our first meeting with Stop Waste and other cities interested in an ordinance like this. We're all going to diverge on exactly what our priorities are, but we are talking about how do we ban, retail of single-use plastics, but there's only certain plastics you can do that for legally. Apparently, other cities have tried it. So maybe we can strengthen the language of. Would you be comfortable with us strengthening the language of this one now to be a little bolder?
Well, this 3.2.1 is very specific.
Restaurants.
Well, we could change. I think the conversation is changing now, and so maybe we change it to say adopt an ordinance, banning single-use plastic. I don't know exactly how to say that. I think it's more than just plastic, but that's a part of the conversation. So we can include the dine-in reusables for dine-in and some of that stuff, but I think the conversation, at least now, is beyond that, and so I think there's a way to. It's gonna if we do it, it's gonna end up being part of the same ordinance. So I'd like to amend this to be broader.
This thing for the takeout foodware is something you can implement right away, whereas the broader target is going to be a much more complicated, much more difficult thing to achieve. So it's not something that's going to get implemented next year.
We're talking about doing a two-phase ordinance. I actually don't like the idea. I'd rather just do one the right way when we're ready. But some cities are feeling pressure to do something right away. So we'll probably do a very sort of easy first step implemented in December and then a bigger one. So.
And I'm sure everybody saw this in the news that Berkeley passed an ordinance that we've talked about, which is that all new construction, they're banning gas in construction. That's going into effect in January. That was passed this week. So I think those kinds of things that we're talking about doing, Berkeley's the first city in the country to do that. Why not Albany be number two?
I think
that's
we
in the-
love-
I think that's in the plan. I mean, that's.
Yeah, we
like
love the idea. I
one
think we have to
point
wait and see.
there. Yeah. So, I mean, I agree. There was also a news report, I think, 2 days ago that I think Union of Concerned Scientists released a report saying that the number of very hot days would increase sharply across the state. I don't remember the exact numbers, but San Jose currently experiences 7 very uncomfortable days above 90 degrees, but that's projected to increase to like 24 or something by mid-century. So it's very relevant to the resiliency aspect. And in Albany, I don't have the exact numbers, but we would expect similar magnitudes of increase, I think, in the frequency.
The other thing I was thinking about, which Preston's comments made me think about in terms of earthquake and the results of an earthquake, is what about an ordinance when property changes hands, or there's any kind of renovation that you put in a automatic gas shut-off that's, that's triggered by earthquakes? 'Cause that would definitely cut down on houses catching on fire or fires going for days in Albany because of gas leaks from earthquakes.
That,
Think about that, Jeff.
no, I think it's a good idea.
Thanks.
Are there any other comments?
So I had a couple of other comments. So I sent some comments to Claire and to staff earlier today, so I won't go over all of them, but we've discussed some of them already. So at a very high level, though, I think it would be extremely important for the city to support at a high level, I mean, at a very visible level, a statement about Albany having a vision to be a climate action leader rather than a follower. And specifically, what I'd like to see is upfront, maybe in the vision statement. So the vision statement currently is Albany works together to ensure a vibrant and sustainable urban village that is livable, equitable, resilient, and engaged. So modifying that to something like Albany is a leader in climate action and works together as a community to ensure a vibrant, healthy, sustainable city that is livable, equitable, resilient for all of its residents and businesses. But I think it's important to set the goal of Albany as a climate leader. It's very consistent with resetting the goals for carbon neutrality and the medium term of 2035 that we just passed a resolution on. And in the past, I think we've been stymied because the council can come back to our proposals and say, why should Albany do this? Why does it matter? But if it's enshrined in the CAP 2.0, then that's our document and that's our guiding star. So I think it's very important to at least try to get that in there up front. So that's one suggestion. But just following that theme, I think I was just doing a search in the CAP document for strollers and rollers and the ACAC, which is the Albany Carbon Climate Action Coalition. Yeah, so I couldn't find any references to that. They may be in there now, but I don't see any way of the city getting anywhere close to this without a much larger effort from the community. So not a top-down approach, but really driven from the bottom up, the ground level up. So I think it's really important to include that. Again, it could be very introductory that the city really needs to mobilize not only other carbon action or carbon pollution reduction groups, but other groups. I mean, schools and community groups, churches, and so forth. So I think that may be missing. So I just encourage that be, really emphasized as a real requirement.
What is our freedom to operate there as far as a city? I mean, can we say, you know, that the city should encourage or support or financially support, or how far can we go with you know, supporting grassroots efforts?
Say the city should engage the community
I-
as individuals and as organizations to promote and support the cap measures, something along those lines.
Yeah.
Yeah, the last kind of high-level comment I have is that in the introduction, there's a statement which is rather inconspicuous. We have a climate emergency. So I think that needs to be much stronger and more visible. What I would recommend is that that be a separate page up front with just a few bullets, because I think for anybody who's opening the plan or looking at it, that needs to be the key takeaway message. And I think a few cities have made a declaration that we are in a climate emergency, including, I think, New York City and maybe some others. I think within Congress, there have been some discussions of that. But I would support the city to just declare this as well, because if you have like hundreds of cities declaring this, then at least it's a, you know, statement of you know, of intent or support or just acknowledgement at least.
Do you want to recommend that council do that, perhaps at the same meeting as their study session?
I remember discussing that with you a couple months ago at the same time, and we thought they would pair well together.
Do you want to make a recommendation?
So I would like to move that we recommend to City Council to pass a declaration stating that climate change is a emergency.
Declaring
Yeah.
a climate emergency.
Declaring a climate emergency.
A second? Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. And then I think this is a little more detailed, but I remember discussing it previously in terms of the time frame, and we discussed there being too many near-term and mid-term. I don't think there's a single long-term strategy, so I wonder what the point of including long-term in there.
Yeah.
Or if we need to rethink that a little bit so that there is a long-term goal.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We changed the timing, but we didn't go through each measure yet because we're waiting for full comment. You know, these measures are probably going to change slightly, but I think that's a really good point for us to consider.
And then going along with that and increasing the aggression of our goal, are we still maintaining our plan for like in 2035 is when we readdress the climate action plan? Because in which case, this would be our main plan for the next 15 years.
Yeah, I think as Ryan mentioned, we're looking at a shorter time frame, between 5 and 10 years, but I think things change so rapidly right now, especially with technology, that we're probably looking at a 5-year time frame. But that's something we should identify in our implementation plan and make very clear in the plan itself.
And then also just clarifying, when it comes to the city council study session, they will be reviewing the implementation plan before we do. Is that correct? Or they'll be, are we reviewing it first?
The goal is to have the implementation plan be attached to the draft cap for their study session so they can talk about both. Because as you've noticed, there's a lot of questions about implementation without
Yes.
that plan next to it. So
Okay.
When you see that before them.
no, you'll see that two days after them.
So then in which case, should we provide comments to city council or save those until Wednesday?
We can be really explicit about the fact that no one has seen it yet. So we can say this is very much a draft, no community feedback yet.
Well,
that-
just to clarify, your meeting is before the city council meeting.
No,
I don't think
not
it is.
No?
in September.
Oh, that was the
in
October one.
October.
I'm sorry, never mind. I got
It
the
gets
mess.
confusing. There. Do you have a? Okay. I don't know what the best practice is in terms of having them submit individual comments to council. I think that's fine. I think it might be more advantageous to do it more generally about the plan. And you're also all welcome to speak at the meeting as well.
And then the other question I had is in terms of the comments that you put together, there were some comments saying that like this will be discussed in the next draft. Is that next draft the one that will
The
be
one will
presented?
go to council. Exactly. The next draft will, I imagine, look quite different given the amount of public comment we've received.
And then I know we've been focusing on material instead of formatting, but will the formatting also be addressed by the next draft?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I didn't mean to preclude people. If people want to send us emails with formatting suggestions, we're happy to take them. We just wanted the general conversation to be about content.
And then the other thing I wanted to discuss, I think we keep getting back to like rhetoric and kind of what the goal tone of the CAP is, because I think some of the members who feel strongly about it aren't here, but there's kind of various opinions about whether we're trying to kind of make people afraid or create a sense of hope, or if there's a combination of the two. But I think that does come into question with, our vision statement and mission and really opening it and the entire CAP altogether and what it looks like. I don't know if there's strong opinions on that.
We're open to feedback. I think we're hesitant to submit something to council that seems scary. Mm-hmm. So that might be why we have chosen this tone for now. But if there's a consensus on the committee, we can definitely take that into consideration.
Well, I think the idea of saying in the CAP that this is an emergency that requires immediate action and bold action is the kind of thing we should be conveying. I think people should be scared.
I mean, one
It does say in one of the, in like which page is this? Like page 4, we have a climate emergency as one of the subheads. So, it's
one strategy there is that it is scary and it is an emergency that requires immediate action, which could be construed as kind of pessimistic or alarming, which it is. But at the same token, we can also say that there's a lot of existing technologies that can go a long way to achieving the goal. If not, carbon neutrality can get us like 80 or 90% of the way there with electric vehicles, clean electricity, solar, wind, and electric heating appliances and heat pumps. So, we can get a long way without having to develop brand new technologies. So, it can also be a hopeful message in that sense.
I guess, last time we talked about this, but I think it strikes a pretty good balance the way it is right now between emphasizing the urgency of it and also providing a path forward. When I talk to people about climate change in the community, first question is, what can I do? I think people are there. I think a lot of people are there, and I shouldn't say everybody, of course, but, Albany's, pretty well in tune, I think. People want a path forward, and so I think this strikes a good balance between inciting some urgency and providing a lot of good practical things that they can do. So I like the balance of it right now.
Okay, are there any other comments? Doesn't sound like that. And it sounds like we're set with this. It's weird. It's our last chance to say anything before City Council study session.
I know.
But I think that'll. Okay, great.
We'll keep on plugging away at it.
Yeah, and the benefit, I want to say, it is uncomfortable to bring something unfinished 100%, but that's the purpose, and we were actually going to bring that to them in July. The goal is to bring them something unfinished, and so that'll be shared. that you haven't vetted this fully.
Okay, in that case, moving on to 6.2, selection of chair and vice chair. Claire and I discussed that it might not be fitting to do this with only 4 of us present.
And you can come in September.
I will be
So
here.
there's less urgency to have a new chair.
Good.
Is that okay with everyone?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Are there any specific things that we'd like to put on our future agenda items? I assume will be quite packed.
At the last meeting, Jeff, you were going to give us an update about some development. Didn't this come up last meeting?
You certainly asked the question. I'm not sure exactly what my answer was. I don't know that we have anything that's on the front burner right now.
You may have mentioned Saha,
The
but
Saha
it's not
project
ready.
is, there'll be another community meeting for that, and we had hoped it was going to be in July, but I don't think that will happen now. But sometime in the next month or two. And in the meantime, they are working on electrification of the project. That's something that they know is important. There's been a development project on and off on Canes at Portland for several years now, and I'm not sure, I'm not directly involved with that, so I'm not sure if that's coming back alive again or not. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head. Does anybody else remember if I mentioned something that I'm spacing out on? The big one is the Saha project, and we just don't have anything for that yet.
Could be helpful to bring back the building electrification measure that you had mentioned, Tom, that Berkeley has recently approved, and also maybe some potential options for Albany. I think we had designated a REACH code or a green building subcommittee. So maybe we should meet.
I can take another
this
shot
time.
at scheduling. Now, that subcommittee can meet anytime you want.
August is great
Yeah,
time
so
for
August maybe, I think it's Tom and myself, right? And I don't know if Nick also, but Nick, okay, so.
Is Nick, the two of you and Nick, and we didn't find a time that was going to work before this meeting. I think it would be really constructive to have that subcommittee meeting before we have a full committee meeting, because there's a lot going on, and I know you're going to have a lot of questions, and it's yeah. So
Let's try and do something in August.
that'd be a great August activity. And I will, just so everybody knows, last night the city council in Berkeley did pass on first reading an ordinance to ban natural gas in new buildings. They're made some, I think, fairly last minute changes to the ordinance that I haven't looked at carefully yet. But those changes are probably pretty important because, at least in my view, the legality of what they were trying to do with the first draft was pretty questionable. And I hope that they tightened it up so that it would avoid challenges from industry that are natural gas related, who are kind of circling this issue quite a bit now. And I could share with the subcommittee some of the statements that they're putting out. And it will also be interesting to see what happens to the Berkeley ordinance. I wouldn't be at all surprised that there's some litigation as a result of that. So we'll see.
I was thinking it was really helpful to have Ryan here presenting the forecast. Would it be possible to have the consultant at our September meeting go over like the implementation strategies that are proposed in the CAP?
Yeah.
The new material that's coming, have
I
a
think-
chance to then have a dialogue and.
I think that could be helpful.
Yes.
So, agenda item?
Yeah, I think that's already will be on the agenda.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay.
I believe so. Okay, in which case,
One future agenda item, just to follow on to what Tom, you mentioned, is plastics are kind of a big issue. So at a future meeting, that would be an interesting one to discuss. I've met a few people who have tried to go plastic-free in their kitchen, and it's really interesting what they're doing. And it's not impossible, but, it's hard.
Okay, in which case, meeting adjourned.
All right.
Finished right at
Thanks.
9:30.